Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz the Chadello.
We have got a huge show for you this week. The president's former attorney is going to jail, in part for crimes he says he committed on the orders of Donald Trump.
Big developments also in the Manafort and Flynn cases, and we'll revisit that fairly unorthodox shutdown meeting with Chuck and Nancy.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security.
I'll take a look back on the year that was with a little help from our fake Trump, John D. Domenico.
But first...
It's very funny.
So much going on this week. The president's former attorney Michael Cohen has been sentenced to 3 years behind bars, in part for crimes he says he committed at the direction of Donald Trump. Cohen admitted to crimes including tax and bank fraud and campaign finance breaches involving the payment of hush money to women who allegedly had affairs with Donald Trump. He also admitted to lying to Congress about the now president's business dealings, including the proposed Trump Tower Moscow, negotiations for which Cohen claims continued for at least 12 months during the Trump campaign, at a time the candidate was repeatedly praising Vladimir Putin. Cohen's sentence was reduced because of the cooperation that he offered to Special Counsel Robert Mueller. He told the court, "Time and again, I felt it as my duty to cover up Trump's dirty deeds rather than listen to my own inner voice and my moral compass." Speaking this morning on Fox News, President Trump denied he'd ordered Cohen to do anything illegal.
In retrospect, I made a mistake, because what he did was all unrelated to me, except for the 2 campaign finance charges that are not criminal and shouldn't have been on there. They put that on to embarrass me. They put those 2 charges on to embarrass me. They're not criminal charges.
Also this week, American Media Inc., the publisher of the tabloid National Enquirer, admitted to funneling money to former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal so she would stay quiet about her affair with Trump until the election was over. And NBC has confirmed that Donald Trump was with Cohen and AMI chief David Pecker in 2015 when the three discussed ways Pecker could help counter negative stories about Trump's relationships with women. And in other developments this week, a heavily redacted court filing from Special Counsel Mueller gave some more details on alleged lies that former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort told investigators in breach of his cooperation agreement. The lies including ongoing contacts between Manafort and unnamed White House staff as late as May this year. This was the president's take on that.
Totally clears the president. Thank you.
Well, former Bush administration ethics lawyer Richard Painter disagrees.
Donald Trump is in serious trouble. His lawyers ought to be telling him to negotiate a plea deal. It's time to negotiate a comprehensive plea deal for Donald Trump that include federal and state charges, reduced charges in return for his resignation.
Meanwhile, lawyers for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn argued this week their client should be spared jail time because he wasn't warned that it was a crime to lie in an interview with FBI agents, and he wasn't told he should have a lawyer present. And finally, Russian gun rights lobbyist and Kremlin agent Maria Butina has reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors over a charge of conspiring against the United States. Butina was accused of infiltrating the Republican Party and conservative groups, including the National Rifle Association, to further the interests of Russia, including making illegal financial contributions which were spent on pro-Trump advertising. Butina is the first Russian convicted over 2016 election interference, and now she's cooperating. She is expected to speak to the Mueller inquiry. And ironically, for somebody who has been working as a Russian gun rights lobbyist, Chaz, Maria Butina, with this conviction, is now not allowed to own a gun.
What a rich tapestry.
Isn't it?
Look, people are obviously asking what the ramifications are for Trump and all this, particularly in the case of Michael Cohen, who is going to jail for a crime that Trump's own Department of Justice believes that Trump directed Cohen to commit. So is Trump going to be indicted for campaign finance violations the moment he's no longer president? Well, Trump supporters have been pointing to a $375,000 fine that Obama's campaign paid for a massive $1.8 million in violations, and they're asking, why wouldn't Trump just get a fine as well? And the answer is that Obama filed corrected reports about his mistakes and paid fines, rather than trying to hide his violations through the use of shelf companies and phony invoices and then lying about his violations for a year. A closer comparison might be John Edwards, who also tried to hide hush money payments, and who the Justice Department prosecuted. In both cases, prosecutors alleged elaborate and deceptive schemes to influence an election from the shadows. But John Edwards beat the charge, and so might Trump. In Edwards' case, they couldn't prove the hush money was for campaign purposes, as opposed to Edwards hiding the affair for, say, his reputation's sake. But in Trump's case, the prosecutors were very careful in AMI's agreement to have them testify that their agreement was to suppress Karen McDougal's story so as to prevent it from influencing the election. So that might take care of the Edwards defence. But there is another defence available to Trump, and that is you can only be found guilty of criminal campaign finance violations when you knowingly and willfully violate campaign finance law. So prosecutors would have to prove somehow that Trump knew he was actually breaking the law. That's not an easy thing to do. Cohen admitted that he knowingly broke the law. I doubt Trump would do the same. By the way, a few weeks back, we were talking about Trump's criticisms of the Mueller probe, and one of them was about Mueller's supposed closeness to Comey. Trump insisted to the Daily Caller he had 100 pictures of Mueller and Comey hugging and kissing each other. Well, Comey was asked about that under oath this week, and he said, "I admire the heck out of Mueller, but I don't know his phone number, I've never been to his house, I don't know his children's names, we're not friends in any social sense. I have never hugged or kissed the man. I'm an admirer, but not that kind of admirer." I think Comey might take the points there, John.
Yeah, game, set and match, perhaps. Well, it began as a photo opportunity before a meeting between the President, the Vice President, the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, and soon-to-be Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who remains Minority Leader until January's new Congress is sworn in. And there was a general mood of bipartisanship following the news that Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell would allow a criminal justice reform bill giving judges more discretion in sentencing non-violent criminals to go to a vote. There was also bipartisan momentum on a very important farm bill. So far, so good, but then they reached the sticking point.
Then we have the easy one, the wall. That'll be the one that will be the easiest of all. What do you think, Chuck? Maybe not?
It's called funding the government, Mr. President.
So we're going to see, but I will tell you the wall will get built. We'll see what happens.
And remarkably, we did see what happens. Instead of ushering the press pool out of the room, the meeting began with the cameras rolling. And soon it descended into bickering over whether there would be a shutdown of the government next week unless Congress agrees to fund Trump's promised border wall.
We can build a much bigger section
let's
with
debate.
more money.
Let's debate in private. Okay? Yeah. Let's
Place
debate in private.
That is devoid, frankly, of fact, and we can.
We need
dispel
border
that.
security. I think we all agree that we need border security.
Yes,
Is that
we
right?
do.
Good.
We do.
See? We get along. Thank you, everybody.
And at that point, you'd expect the cameras to leave. But no. Instead, reporters started throwing questions and fuel on the fire.
We need border security. The wall is a part of border security. You can't have very good border security without the wall. No.
That's absolutely not true.
Just
That
kidding.
is a political promise. Border security is a way to effectively honor our
And
responsibility.
the experts say you can do border security without a wall, which is wasteful and doesn't solve the problem.
And that very public debate continued for a full 15 minutes until President Trump said words that could come back to haunt him.
I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down.
That is
And I'm going to
luxury.
shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut
Okay.
it down.
Yeah, at that point, Chuck Schumer's just going, "You beauty!" And interesting as well, through it all, Vice President Mike Pence, he said nothing, not a single word.
He's the strong silent type, John. Look, that Trump grab that you played was certainly interesting because conventional wisdom would suggest you should avoid ownership of the shutdown. Certainly the media seem to think that Pelosi and Schumer somehow goaded Trump into claiming shutdown ownership. But I don't think that's true. I think he wanted it. The day before that meeting took place, a White House source told The Atlantic that the president said that he wants $5 billion. It's crystal clear and we're executing it. He's willing to shut it down. He's willing to own it. So Trump may well have staged that scene in front of the cameras because he wanted ownership of the shutdown. He thinks he's winning, and Pelosi and Schumer think they're winning. So maybe we will get that shutdown after all. And one of those sides is going to be very, very wrong. If you believe the polls, the person who's wrong is Trump. According to an NPR poll from 2 weeks ago, 57% of people say that Trump should compromise on the wall to avoid a shutdown, including 63% of independents. But this wouldn't be the first time that Trump has rewritten the rules, and the real battle hasn't started yet. Now, importantly, I should say this would not be a full shutdown because most of the government has already been funded. The departments that would shut down are Homeland Security, Commerce, State, Justice, Interior, and a few others. But Homeland Security is the biggie. So, ironically, to fund border security, Trump might shut down border security. Also, while there are no pension checks or hospitals being threatened, there is one potentially massive issue. Homeland Security means airport security, which means airports could shut down for the Christmas period. That could focus some minds. Another problem that Trump faces is he keeps tweeting things like this.
Our southern border is now secure and will remain that way.
And this.
People do not yet realize how much of the wall has already been built.
To proclaim his border successes. But then he simultaneously has to turn around and say that the border security is so bad, it justifies shutting down the government. So we'll see how well he walks that tightrope. One more wild card, John. Trump also tweeted that if the Democrats don't give him the votes, then the military will build the remaining sections of the wall. And I can't help noticing that this week, Trump told Defense Secretary Mattis to submit a request of $750 billion for the defense budget, even though that was $17 billion more than Mattis wanted to ask for. Could that be the way Trump plans to get his wall built? I smell a court case, John.
Very interesting. Now, of course, the week began with this announcement.
John Kelly will be leaving, but I don't know if I can say retiring, but he's a great guy. John Kelly will be leaving at the end of the year. We'll be announcing who will be taking John's place. It might be on an interim basis. I'll be announcing that over the next day or two.
That wasn't a huge surprise given reports the pair were reportedly hardly on speaking terms for the last few months. A day passed, then two, then reports emerged that Trump's first pick, VP Mike Pence's Chief of Staff Nick Ayers, had turned Trump down and was leaving the White House. And so all week, other names were being floated.
Congressman Mark Meadows, former Deputy Campaign Manager David Bossie, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, and the OMB Director Mick Mulvaney.
Well, some of those are still in the mix, apparently. Mark Meadows, though, ruled himself out. So too did former Senator Rick Santorum. As we go to air, the latest potential Chief of Staff being considered is reportedly former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who was spotted at the White House yesterday. Here's what he said.
Who do you think should be Chief of Staff?
Are you here for the Chief of Staff? How's your golf game?
Newt Gingrich is never far away, John, and neither is an awkward Trump tweet from 2012. Like
3 chief of staffs in less than 3 years of being president. Part of the reason why Barack Obama can't manage to pass his agenda.
And of course, this makes 3 chiefs of staff for Trump in 2 years, assuming he finds one eventually.
Yes, and you're correct. Chiefs of Staff, not Chief of Staff. Now, perhaps the hesitation that the potential Chiefs of Staff are showing has something to do with the President describing his former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson this week as
dumb as a rock, lazy as hell.
That came after Tillerson made this rare public criticism of the President.
Pretty undisciplined, doesn't like to read, doesn't read briefing reports, doesn't like to get into the details of a lot of things, but rather just kind of says, look, this is what I believe.
Although it wasn't as bad as when he reportedly called him an effing moron. So there's that. Now, in other comings and goings this week, President Trump announced that William Barr is his choice to be America's next Attorney General, replacing the fired Jeff Sessions. Barr, who served as AG during the Bush 41 administration and helped to guide them through the final phase of the Iran-Contra scandal, was reportedly hesitant to take the Trump job. The Wall Street Street Journal reporting he tried to steer the White House towards other candidates. In the end, he took it himself, Chaz.
Yeah, some Democrats have expressed concerns about Barr, mostly because he's declared himself open to investigating Hillary Clinton before, and he expressed support for the sacking of Jim Comey. But I tell you who does approve of Barr.
Yeah.
Jim Comey. Last week, Comey said, "I think very highly of Barr. I probably just damned him by saying he's a friend of mine, but I respect him. I think he's certainly fit to be Attorney General." And it's not just Comey. Most of the legal fraternity, including Trump frenemy George Conway, are all Barr supporters.
So clearly Trump is going to sack him now.
History would suggest yes. Look, he did oversee 2 special counsels without incident the last time he was Attorney General, but on the other hand, Barr did give the all clear to George H.W. Bush's extremely dubious pardoning of the Iran-Contra plotters. So he may be hearing a little bit more about Barr's theories of pardoning special counsel witnesses a little bit down the track.
Yeah, you're right. Now, the US economy, it's fair to say, has been on a roll for a while now, but there are growing concerns that the expansion, which began in the middle of 2009, may be drawing to an end. So, what impact have tax cuts and trade tensions had on the current economic outlook? And are we, as some are predicting, heading for a recession soon? Larry Summers is one of America's best-known economists. He was US Treasury Secretary under President Bill Clinton, and he was head of President Obama's National Security Council. And Larry Summers joined us exclusively on Planet America. Larry Summers, welcome to the program. Thanks for your time.
Glad to be with you.
How would you assess the current state of the US economy?
The economy's good, but there are a lot of storm clouds.
Such as?
Storm clouds coming from what's happened in markets, storm clouds from geopolitical uncertainties with China, storm clouds, frankly, from the erratic character of our president in his international policies and his domestic policies, storm clouds coming from the fact that the expansion is growing long in the tooth. So all these things give one the sense of substantial unease going forward. At the same time, it has to be recorded that we're currently enjoying a combination of low unemployment and low inflation that would have looked very unlikely some years ago.
Larry, when you talk about unemployment, we're looking at the best unemployment figures for 50 years, and yet real wages still are barely budging. Why is that?
Probably a combination of things. I think the most important thing is that workers feel apprehensive. They feel apprehensive because of the forces of globalization. They feel apprehensive because of the forces of technology. They feel apprehensive because firms are being run in a harder-edged way, quicker to outsource, quicker to turn to the gig economy. And all of that means that workers feel less secure. And when workers are less secure, they're more focused on preserving their jobs and a bit less focused on advancing their standards of living.
A year ago, President Trump and the Republicans in Congress passed quite extensive tax cuts. What impact would you say they have had filtering through the economy in 2018?
Not much. I think they've probably operated to put more money into the economy and to cause there to be more spending. The hope for those tax cuts was that they would generate substantial increases in business investment that would expand the capacity of the economy, and that doesn't seem to have been happened. The National Association of Business Economists, hardly a group that you'd expect to be unenthusiastic about business tax cuts, found that the vast majority of its members didn't think the tax cuts had had any impact at all on their firm's investment plans. Looks like the single largest use of the monies produced by the corporate tax cuts was buybacks of stock, which are good for shareholders, but doesn't do anything for the broader economy. So I think we made a substantial commitment of resources to those tax cuts, and I'm not sure we're getting a commensurate benefit.
What about the trade war? You mentioned the Trump administration's temperament. A lot of economists say that the problem so far with the trade war is more what might be around the corner rather than what's happened so far. Like so far, it's not necessarily great, but the threat is much worse. What's your view? Do you think there's been a substantial amount of damage done so far, or is it more the threat of what's to come?
I don't think the taxes, the tariffs that have been levied and the revenue they've taken out of the economy has been enough to do substantial damage to the economy. I think there's been a psychological effect to very significantly raise uncertainty, and that has adverse consequences. And I think this sense that one gets of a world slightly out of control when the two leading countries sit down and say they reach an agreement and then don't know what agreement they reached, I think all of that has to make investors more jittery and more nervous, and that does have a negative effect on the performance of the economy. But I'd agree with you that the direct impact of the tariffs so far probably isn't very large.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago to Stephanie Kelton, who is one of the major proponents of modern monetary theory, the theory that people should care less about the debt and more about inflation. And as long as you keep inflation low, it doesn't matter how big the debt gets. What's your feelings about that?
Like all good ideas, Stephanie Kelton takes some of the Keynesian ideas much too far. She's right that the borrowing of a government that can print money should be thought of in a quite different way than your household or my household, your family or my family borrowing money. And she's right that you should judge it in terms of its macroeconomic consequences. But I don't think she's right to say that the only aspect of budget deficits that you ever would have to worry about has to do with inflation. If you're in a situation like Italy, for example, I think they're at risk of getting into a spiral where there's worries about their ability to repay the debt, and that causes a collapse in their economy, and not necessarily could be a deflationary collapse rather than an inflationary collapse. Even in the context of the United States, at certain points when budget deficits are really crowding into a limited supply of savings, they could push interest rates way up, and that could choke off all kinds of investment, and that could have quite serious consequences for growth. So I think framing inflation as the only risk associated with debt is not right. I mean, it just sort of stands to reason. I think deficit hawks are wrong when they say you should have a balanced budget. There's no reason why your debt shouldn't go up as rapidly as your income does. But deficit doves, like Professor Kelton, I think go wrong when they suggest it doesn't matter if your debt to GDP ratio is going up, nor does it matter how much your debt to GDP ratio is going up.
Based on Kelton and others' ideas, political figures like Bernie Sanders, but others as well emerging on the left of the Democratic Party are saying, well, with that money, we can have a jobs guarantee, we can have universal health care, we can have free college tuition, we can have all these things. These are the things we should be getting into debt on rather than military spending or bailing out banks and the auto industry. What do you think?
I think Bernie paints with much too broad a brush. If we had not bailed out the automobile industry, the economies of the north central region of our economy would have failed. I don't have more taste for bankers than others do, but if we had allowed all the major banks in the country to fail, we would still be in a depression. So I think that was the right thing to do. And besides that, the government turned a profit on the money that was invested in the banks and the money that was invested in the auto industry. If you take account of the fact that because we kept the companies going, we had to pay less unemployment insurance, we had to pay less Medicaid than we would have if those companies had collapsed, then it looks like it was a positive investment for the government as well. So I think he's confused on those points. I also think he's not right to somehow suggest that because you borrow money for something, it becomes free. And I would rather see us have a government that believes in priority setting than a government that tries to do everything that's on everybody's wish list.
Leaving aside the trade-offs, are there any of those ideas that the left are pushing at the moment? Medicare for all, free college, jobs guarantee, universal basic income, any of them that you feel are worth prioritising?
You know, a lot of these, it's a little hard to know what they mean. I think there should be a public option in healthcare. I certainly think that it should be possible for more people than can today to buy into Medicare. So you could think of those things as being steps towards Medicare for all. I'm not very enthusiastic about the universal basic income because I'd rather pay people to work rather than pay them not to work. But I think a well-designed federal employment program could likely make a substantial contribution at a time when 1 in 7 men between the ages of 25 and 54 in the United States is not working.
There's a lot of talk at the moment about government shutdowns. And usually what happens when there's these self-imposed government crises, either whether it be a shutdown or whether it be hitting a debt ceiling, you have the people in Treasury running around, moving cash around to make sure that to try and minimise the damage. Are there any costs associated with these shutdowns that the public don't know about, that we should know about?
I think there are two kinds of costs. One is there's some basically highly unproductive time that could be spent making the world a better place that is instead spent on accounting maneuvering. I think also it undercuts the sense of confidence that we have grown-up, mature, well-functioning institutions when these kinds of shutdowns happen. And those kinds of things, little bit by bit, can be demoralizing to a society. You know, if you read about the fall of Rome, a kind of gradual demoralization was an important part of that. If you look at why Britain lost its preeminence, a sort of growing decadence and lack of confidence in institutions was probably a contributor.
We began our discussion by talking about some of the looming economic clouds that you're perceiving at the moment. Just how dark are those clouds? Some are saying that next year we're going to see a full-blown recession, if not in 2020. And indeed, some on the left are saying, oh, goody, that'll have a political impact on
I think
President
the odds
Trump.
I think the odds are a little below 50-50 that we'll have a recession by the end. The recession will have started by the end of 2020. If you look historically, if the economy's not in recession, it's got a 20 to 25% chance of going into recession within the next year. We've got about 2 years. I think, if anything, this is probably a more dangerous moment than most because of geopolitical risk, because of inflated asset values, because of a certain measure of political dysfunctionality.
Well, many thanks indeed for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that was pretty cool, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I got to say, though, I thought Larry and I formed a special connection.
Really? A Comey-Mueller kind of connection?
No, not so much hugging and kissing, but a real meeting of the minds, if you will. When there's these self-imposed government crises, either whether it be a shutdown or whether it be hitting a debt ceiling, you have... I mean, just look at that. The man is fascinated by me.
Well, it has been a very busy 12 months here on Planet America, and things are only going to get crazier in the next year with the presidential campaign officially getting underway and Democrats in Congress turning up the heat on the president. We'll take a bit of a look ahead shortly, but first, a reminder of just what an extraordinary year we've had. 2018 began with fears a war with North Korea might start on Twitter.
I do have a nuclear button, but it's a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works.
Michael Wolff's fire and fury hit bookshelves. Wolff claimed people close to the president doubt his mental capacity. But the president described himself as
a very stable genius.
February, President Trump's personal lawyer Michael Cohen admitted giving $130,000 to adult performer Stormy Daniels, but denied anyone in the Trump organization knew of the payment or reimbursed him.
It didn't happen.
And according to the New Yorker, President Trump had a 9-month affair with Playboy model Karen McDougal in 2006. The White House issued a denial. March was a month of administration exits.
Are you happy, Gary?
Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohen resigned in protest over steel and aluminium import tariffs. He was replaced by Larry Kudlow. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was sacked and replaced by Mike Pompeo, and the former acting director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, was dismissed, officially for misleading investigators.
Andrew McCabe fired. He knew all about the lies and corruption going on at the highest levels of the FBI.
President Trump next fired National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster and Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin, nominating his White House doctor instead.
I intend to nominate highly respected Admiral Rodney L. Jackson, MD, as the new Secretary of Veteran Affairs.
But Jackson faced allegations he drank on the job and too freely prescribed pills to staff, and he dropped out. April, FBI and federal prosecutors raided the home and office of Michael Cohen, seizing files, computers and phones.
It's a disgraceful situation. It's a total witch hunt.
Meanwhile, the president renewed his attack on James Comey, who published his memoir saying he always assumed Hillary Clinton would win. Trump called him a
slime ball.
The president announced North Korea had agreed to denuclearize ahead of a planned summit with Kim Jong-un.
The Iran deal.
May, President Trump said the US was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, then abruptly cancelled the North Korea talks.
This is a tremendous setback.
And then, just as abruptly, the talks were back on.
They want it. We think it's important. And I think we would be making a big mistake if we didn't have it.
And so they had it in June with a handshake, more promises, but
no timetable, no plans to verify, but it is a start.
Meanwhile, the president left a G7 summit in Canada without signing the final communique after a spat over tariffs.
PM Justin Trudeau of Canada acted so meek and mild during our G7 meetings, very dishonest and weak.
June ended with Anthony Kennedy's decision to retire from the US Supreme Court. July saw Scott Pruitt resign from the EPA in the face of an ethics investigation.
I did not approve.
Brett Kavanaugh announced as President Trump's second Supreme Court pick, and Special Counsel Robert Mueller indicted 12 Russian intelligence officers over the 2016 hacking of the DNC. 3 days later, President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, and Trump contradicted his own intelligence agencies.
They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
That triggered rare bipartisan condemnation, led by ailing Senator John McCain.
Today's press conference in Helsinki was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory.
The next day, President Trump said he misspoke.
What do you think is going to happen today?
A taped conversation between Trump and Michael Cohen was published showing the president knew of the hush money payment to centerfold Karen McDougal.
Wow.
Cohen claimed Trump also knew in advance about the infamous June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Russians offering dirt on Hillary Clinton, something the president had denied.
Russia is a ruse.
As July ended, the trial of former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort began in Virginia. In August, the president called on his attorney general to end the Mueller probe.
Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stand our country any further.
Under pressure to answer questions from the special counsel, the president's lawyer Rudy Giuliani explained why that could pose a perjury trap.
It's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth. He didn't have a conversation
Truth is
about...
truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth.
Meanwhile, Michael Cohen entered a guilty plea to 5 counts of tax evasion, implicating the president in the illegal payoff of Stormy Daniels, while Paul Manafort was found guilty of tax evasion and bank fraud and began cooperating with Mueller to avoid a second trial. On August 25th, Senator John McCain died. President Trump wasn't invited to his funeral. Former rivals George W. Bush and Barack Obama were.
He made us better presidents, just as he made this country better.
In September, Senate confirmation hearings began for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Then came a devastating anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. A senior White House staffer claimed they and others were working to protect the country from President Trump.
Trump engages in repetitive rants, and his impulsiveness results in half-baked, ill-informed, and occasionally reckless decisions that have to be walked back.
Donald Trump then addressed the UN General Assembly, but this boast didn't get quite the reaction he'd expected.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. So true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Just as his confirmation looked assured, multiple sexual assault allegations were made against Brett Kavanaugh. One accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, testified before the Senate.
I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling.
Kavanaugh denied the charges.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed. I was not at the party described by Dr. Ford.
Judge Kavanaugh was confirmed in October by a 2-vote margin. Nikki Haley resigned as UN ambassador. Don McGahn resigned as White House counsel. Journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. President Trump unwilling to blame the Saudi crown prince, despite the assessment of the CIA. A migrant caravan formed in Central America, making border security a major issue in November's midterm elections.
Caravan after caravan.
President Trump campaigned heavily, but Democrats won 40 House seats and a majority in the next Congress, their best result since the 1970s, while Republicans picked up 2 Senate spots. The next day, Attorney General Jeff Sessions was fired.
Even my enemies say that Jeff Sessions should have told you that he was going to recuse himself, and then you wouldn't have put him in.
Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about a deal to build Trump Tower Moscow. The president maintains there was nothing wrong with doing business while campaigning. Former President George Bush died. This time, President Trump was invited to the funeral. And in December, sentencing memos for Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort gave further clues about the legal battles ahead for members of the Trump campaign and the president himself. Bill Barr was announced as the next Attorney General, and Trump's Chief of Staff, John Kelly, announced his departure. At the end of it all, the president maintained he'd done nothing wrong.
No schmucking gun, no collusion.
And that was 2018, the year in Trump.
If he don't look good, we don't look good. This is our president.
Sit, Georgie. Sit. Sit. Down. Down. That's just about it for another week and indeed for another year. We have got George the dog with us. Chaz, tell me, over the next few weeks, while we're off the air, what are the stories you're going to be keeping a close eye on?
Look, there's one story that hasn't gotten a lot of attention so far, but it might blow up in a big way. Last week, the chief financial officer of Chinese tech giant Huawei was arrested in Canada, and it's suspected that Canada arrested her on America's behalf because Huawei violated US sanctions on Iran. But the thing is, she's also the owner's daughter, and Huawei are all tied up in China's bid to win the race for 5G technology. So this is a very delicate matter while America and China are playing trade hardball. It would be easy for China to think that America had just taken a trade hostage, especially when Trump says things like this about intervening in the arrest. If I think it's good for the country, if I think it's good for what will be certainly the largest trade deal ever made, I would certainly intervene if I thought it was necessary. In other words, Trump is probably accidentally making this lady's arrest seem like an explicit pawn in his trade negotiations, which means this could escalate rapidly. China have already detained a Canadian, supposedly on suspicion of engaging in activities that harm China's state security. So what happens when China starts detaining Americans? I'll be keeping my eye on that one. How about you?
I'm going to be keeping my eye on the state of New Hampshire. Of course, they hold the first primary in the presidential nominating contest, and most of the attention so far has been on the Democrats, because we're maybe going to get 20 or 30 of them that are going to be off and running in the next few weeks, declarations to start in January, probably. But there's something very interesting going on the Republican side. A lot of people who support President Trump in the state are trying to block a potential challenge to Donald Trump for renomination by somebody like John Kasich, who, as you recall, came second to Trump in the New Hampshire primary in 2016 by installing a Trump loyalist as the head of the New Hampshire Republican Party and by having the party itself endorse Donald Trump before the primary. So the entire state party apparatus goes in behind President Trump, effectively blocking John Kasich from mounting an insurgent challenge. So this is not just about New Hampshire, this is about the possibility of Kasich or Corker or Flake or Sass or whoever you choose to name challenging Donald Trump for renomination. And it's playing out right now in New Hampshire.
Okay, well, one more thing. You might remember we told you a few weeks ago that Paul Ryan had smuggled language into a bill about grey wolves.
Don't listen, George.
To stop the House debating the war on Yemen. Well, Paul Ryan's done it again. This time he smuggled a blocking measure in the must-pass farm bill. Well, good riddance, Paul Ryan. Sometime soon, a Democratic House are going to be voting on Yemen. And between them and the Senate, who just voted 56-41 to end American support for the war, we might finally see some real action on America getting out of Yemen. Look out for that one over the next month or two, John.
Look out for the president to reach into the desk and pull out the pen and sign a veto on that one.
That is true.
All right, that is it. We are out of time. We are back on the first Friday in February for what promises to be one heck of a year, Chaz.
Yes, I'm going to be updating the Facebook page, of course, over the holidays because I have no idea how to relax. See you in 6 weeks.
Bye-bye.